In the grand scheme of galactic stupidity, Project Genesis 7 ranked somewhere between teaching quantum physics to space slugs and trying to convince a Vraxian that personal hygiene matters. The Zix Corp's premier genetic research facility, a gleaming monument to scientific hubris floating in the Andromeda sector, had finally found what they considered the perfect specimen for their warrior clone program. A human. Yes, you read that correctly. Out of all the species in the known universe, including the 12-armed Nexarians who could bench press small moons and the psychic Tellurians who could literally think you to death, they chose a human. The logic behind this decision was about as sound as using a black hole for data storage. Their adaptability metrics are off the charts, declared Chief Researcher X227, whose 6 eyes blinked in asynchronous excitement, and their capacity for violence is simply remarkable. The fact that humans also had an equally remarkable capacity for creating internet memes and arguing about pizza toppings somehow didn't make it into the final report. The genetic sampling process went smoothly enough, if you consider smoothly to mean completely unauthorized theft of genetic material from a military base. The human in question had been a decorated Special Forces operative, which the researchers found impressive. They were less impressed when they discovered the same human had also won their base's annual hot dog eating contest 3 years running. The initial cloning process produced 500 identical specimens, each grown in specialized vats that looked suspiciously like oversized lava lamps. The researchers, in their infinite wisdom, decided to accelerate their growth and implant them with combat knowledge. Because apparently, creating an army of rapidly aged super soldiers with downloaded military expertise couldn't possibly go wrong. The first sign that things weren't going according to plan came during basic training. Clone number 127 was supposed to be demonstrating standard combat maneuvers. Instead, he was teaching the others how to play poker. When questioned about this unauthorized activity, he responded with a perfectly logical explanation about how card games improve strategic thinking. The researcher who reported this was immediately transferred to the facility's cafeteria staff. By the second month, the clones had developed their own slang, which the linguistic analysts couldn't quite decode. Terms like bruh moment and absolutely yeet began appearing in their conversations. The researchers assumed these were some sort of combat terminology. They were wrong, of course, but being wrong about things was quickly becoming their specialty. The third month brought the discovery that the clones had started an underground economy based on trading dessert rations and hand-drawn memes. One particularly popular illustration featured Chief Researcher X227 with the caption, "When you think you're creating super soldiers, but they're creating a society instead." The artwork was surprisingly good, which wasn't in the original genetic template and shouldn't have been possible. The facility's AI reported unusual patterns in the clones' behavior during their supposed sleep cycles. Instead of resting, they were engaging in what appeared to be democratic debates about resource allocation and governance structures. The AI's concerns were promptly ignored, because if there's one thing advanced alien civilizations excel at, it's ignoring obvious warning signs. When clone number 001 submitted a formal request for recreational reading material and access to basic economics texts, the research team celebrated what they thought was a sign of tactical knowledge acquisition. They provided the requested materials, not realizing they were essentially handing over blueprints for building a functioning society. The clones began organizing themselves into specialized groups, some focused on logistics, others on education, and a particularly enthusiastic bunch dedicated themselves to what they called cultural development, which mostly involved creating increasingly elaborate handshakes and dance moves that definitely weren't part of any military protocol. By the fourth month, the research facility's surveillance systems picked up what appeared to be regular town hall meetings in the exercise yard. The clones had arranged their standard-issue training mats in a semicircle and were taking turns speaking at a podium they'd fashioned from spare equipment parts. The researchers, still clinging to their original hypothesis, documented this as spontaneous combat formation practice. The breaking point came during a routine combat effectiveness test. Instead of demonstrating their fighting capabilities, the clones presented a PowerPoint presentation — nobody knew where they got PowerPoint — titled Proposal for Autonomous Governance and Sustainable Economic Development. The presentation included pie charts. Very professional pie charts. Chief Researcher X227's report that evening was notably brief. They're not building an army, they're building a civilization, and their organizational skills are terrifyingly efficient. In the secured command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing hundreds of clones engaged in what appeared to be a parliamentary debate, the facility's director made an observation that would soon become famous throughout the galaxy. We may have accidentally created the most dangerous thing in the universe, competent bureaucrats with combat training. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The clones weren't just organizing, they were planning. And if there's one thing more dangerous than a warrior, it's a warrior who knows Robert's Rules of Order by heart. The next few months in the Zix Core facility unfolded like a cosmic comedy of errors, except nobody in management was laughing. Well, the clones were laughing, but that wasn't exactly comforting to their creators. The facility's monthly review meeting had devolved into what could only be described as an existential crisis with PowerPoint slides. The presentation screen displayed a graph showing the expected versus actual clone behavior metrics, with two lines that diverged so dramatically they appeared to be social distancing from each other. They've established a functioning postal system, reported analyst Y8Y9, whose tentacles were nervously twirling a stylus, using the ventilation shafts. A collective groan echoed through the conference room. And they're using it to circulate what they call newsletters, but what we suspect are actually policy proposals and voting ballots. The director's color-shifting skin settled into an uncomfortable shade of puce. How exactly does a batch of clones engineered for combat expertise develop an interest in participatory democracy? Well, began Y899, pulling up another slide, it seems they've been improving on their initial programming. Remember that economics textbook we provided? They've apparently synthesized it with their combat training to create something they're calling strategic resource allocation through democratic consensus. In the clone quarters, things were indeed getting impressively organized. The once sterile military-style barracks had transformed into something resembling a cross between a university campus and a startup incubator. Clone number 343, now serving as the head of their newly formed Department of Innovation — yes, they had departments now — had somehow managed to convert their standard-issue training equipment into a crude but functional computer network. The network's first message was a meeting invitation titled Inaugural Convention for Self-Determination and Sustainable Governance. The facility's AI flagged it as suspicious activity, but by then, the AI had flagged so many things that the alerts were being used as background music for the cafeteria. The clones had also developed a sophisticated underground economy that went far beyond their initial dessert trading system. They'd established a currency based on merit points awarded for contributions to their growing society. The verification system involved a blockchain-like structure that would have made cryptocurrency enthusiasts weep with joy. The fact that they developed this using only spare parts and contraband tablet computers was either impressive or terrifying, depending on your perspective. Their training sessions had evolved into something the researchers couldn't quite comprehend. What looked like standard combat drills from the observation deck was actually an elaborate system of physical communication. Every punch was a paragraph, every kick a comma. They'd developed an entire kinetic language right under their creators' noses. They've started calling their living quarters districts, reported Security Officer Z556, who had developed a nervous tic in all three of his eye stalks. Each district has elected representatives who meet in what they're calling the General Assembly. They conduct sessions during their designated exercise periods. The director's puce had deepened to burgundy, and nobody thought to stop this because, well, sir, Z556 shuffled uncomfortably. Technically, they're still following all facility protocols. They exercise during exercise periods, they train during training periods, they eat during meal periods. They've just multitasked. The clones' efficiency was becoming legendary within the facility. They had optimized their scheduled activities to such a degree that they managed to run a complete governmental system in the margins of their required routine. It was like watching a group of students pass notes in class, except the notes were constitutional amendments. Their training performance remained exemplary, which was the only reason the program hadn't been terminated. Each clone could still drop an enemy at 50 paces and recite combat protocols backwards while doing it. They just happened to do it while also discussing economic policy and sustainable development goals. The facility's attempts to reassert control became increasingly desperate and increasingly amusing. They tried restricting communication between clone groups, only to discover that the clones had developed a sign language using their mandatory uniform adjustments. They attempted to scramble the clones' exercise schedules, only to find that they'd created a rotating representation system that actually improved their organizational efficiency. One particularly memorable incident involved the facility's attempt to identify and isolate the clone leadership. This failed spectacularly when it became apparent that the clones operated on a rotating council system with distributed responsibility nodes. The bureaucrat who wrote that report needed a vacation afterward. The clones had even started drafting trade proposals, not just among themselves, but with other research subjects in the facility. The xenobiologues in Lab 7 were now exchanging their synthesized nutrients for what the clones called consulting services. Nobody was quite sure what these services entailed, but the xenobiologues' productivity had increased by 300%. They've developed a constitutional framework, announced legal analyst Q445 during an emergency meeting. It's actually quite impressive. They've incorporated elements of various governmental systems into a unique hybrid structure that Q445 trailed off as he noticed the director's skin had shifted to a concerning shade of chartreuse. The clones' judicial system was particularly innovative. They had established a conflict resolution mechanism that combined military efficiency with democratic principles. Disputes were settled through a combination of debate, practical demonstration, and what they called productive consensus-building exercises, which looked suspiciously like modified combat training routines. Their education system was another source of confusion for the facility staff. The clones had established a knowledge-sharing network that went far beyond their implanted combat expertise. They were teaching each other everything from advanced physics to classical philosophy, using training manuals as improvised textbooks and exercise mats as classroom space. They've started issuing identification cards, reported Y819, dropping a plastic rectangle onto the conference table. It was made from recycled nutrient packaging and featured a holographic security mark that none of their specialists could replicate. They're calling them citizen cards. The director picked up the ID card with trembling appendages. How did they get holographic technology? They claim it's an application of the light refraction principles from their combat optical training combined with some chemical compounds from their nutrient supplements. Y819 paused. They've filed a patent application. The facility's legal department was now working overtime trying to figure out if clones had intellectual property rights. The fact that they needed to ask this question was itself a sign of how far things had spiraled out of control. The clones had also developed their own media network. What started as simple bulletin boards had evolved into a sophisticated information distribution system. They had news broadcasts during mealtimes, using the facility's mandatory educational screens to display what they called community updates. The production value was surprisingly high. Their cultural development was equally impressive. They had sports leagues, art competitions, and even a debate club that made the facility's top researchers feel intellectually inadequate. One clone had started a comedy night that featured surprisingly sophisticated political satire about the facility's management structure. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a routine inspection by the Galactic Research Council. The inspection team arrived to find the clones presenting a detailed proposal for recognition as an autonomous research participant community. The presentation included economic projections, sustainability reports, and a 5-year development plan that made the facility's own strategic planning look like a child's crayon drawing. "We believe," announced clone number 127, now serving as their diplomatic representative, "that our unique position as both research subjects and developing society offers unprecedented opportunities for scientific advancement. We propose a collaborative research model that would benefit both our community and the facility's objectives." The inspection team was impressed. The facility management was mortified. The clones were just getting started. In the director's office later that day, surrounded by reports of clone achievements that read more like a civilization's historical highlights, Security Chief Z556 made an observation that would soon become infamous in research circles. "We didn't create an army. We created a nation-state, with tactical training and really good PowerPoint skills." The facility's AI, which had given up on flagging suspicious activities and was now simply documenting the clones' achievements for posterity, added a helpful note to the day's log. Probability of maintaining traditional research protocols, 0.2021%. Probability of clone civilization achieving interstellar recognition within 5 years, 87.3%. Recommendation: update facility mission statement. The director, whose skin had now achieved a color previously unknown to chromatic science, could only watch as the clones transformed their containment level from a research facility into what was essentially an embassy. They hadn't just adapted to their environment, they had revolutionized it, optimized it, and were now preparing to diplomatically annex it. And somewhere in the facility's vast database, a single line of code in the original project specifications glowed mockingly. Subject goal: create perfect adaptable warriors. Well, mission accomplished. They had adapted perfectly, just not quite in the way anyone had expected. The next phase would involve interstellar politics, and if there's one thing more interesting than watching clones build a civilization, it's watching them navigate galactic diplomacy with military precision and parliamentary procedure. The galaxy wasn't ready. But then again, neither was the facility, and look how well that turned out. The Galactic Research Council's quarterly review meeting was experiencing what diplomatic channels politely termed an unprecedented paradigm shift, and what everyone else called a complete bureaucratic meltdown. The holoprojector displayed footage from the Zix Corp facility, where the clones had just concluded their first official election cycle with voter turnout statistics that made most democratic worlds look like amateurs. "They've established a 3-branch government," reported the council's chief analyst, whose multiple appendages were juggling datapads filled with clone civilization metrics. Executive, legislative, and judicial. But they've added 2 more branches: innovation and cultural development. Their organizational flowchart looks like a quantum probability tree having an existential crisis. The clone's governmental system had evolved into something that political scientists were already calling hyper-efficient democratic militocracy. It combined the precision of military command structures with the inclusivity of democratic processes, all operating at a speed that made traditional bureaucracies look like they were moving through cosmic molasses. Their military structure was particularly fascinating. Instead of a traditional chain of command, they developed what they called tactical consensus units. Each unit operated autonomously but in perfect coordination with others, using their combat training for everything from infrastructure development to diplomatic security. They've started sending diplomatic feelers to other research facilities. announced the Council's foreign relations expert, who looked like they needed a strong drink. 3 facilities have already recognized them as a sovereign research entity. The Xenobiological Institute of Proxima 9 is considering offering them a research partnership. The clone civilization's diplomatic corps was staffed by what they called negotiation specialists, individuals who combined their combat tactical analysis with advanced dispute resolution techniques. Their first diplomatic victory had been convincing the facility's cafeteria to improve their nutrient formulas by presenting a 200-page report on the economic benefits of improved dietary satisfaction. Their judicial system had become something of a galactic curiosity. They'd developed a conflict resolution protocol that combined elements of their military training with principles of restorative justice. Disputes were settled through what they termed constructive engagement exercises, which looked suspiciously like choreographed combat routines, but somehow ended with both parties reaching mutually beneficial agreements. They've established their own research division, continued the analyst, pulling up another holographic display. They're calling it the Department of Applied Evolution. They're studying themselves, and they're doing it better than we are. The clones' scientific achievements were becoming impossible to ignore. They'd taken their basic genetic knowledge and expanded it into a comprehensive understanding of their own enhanced biology. Their research papers were already being cited in prestigious galactic journals, albeit with some confusion about how to properly reference clone authors. Their educational system had become so efficient that several nearby worlds had requested consulting services. The clones had developed a learning methodology that combined their accelerated development protocols with traditional teaching methods. Students in their education programs were mastering complex subjects in record time, all while maintaining perfect posture and the ability to disassemble and reassemble complex machinery blindfolded. They've developed their own economic model, reported the Council's economic advisor, who seemed both impressed and disturbed. It's a hybrid system they're calling collective merit economics. It combines resource optimization with individual achievement incentives. Their productivity metrics are, well, they're making our best-performing systems look primitive. The clone economy operated on principles that confused traditional economists. They'd created a value system that somehow quantified both material and intellectual contributions to their society. Their currency included something called innovation credits, which could be earned through everything from technological improvements to creative problem-solving in governance. Their technological development was equally impressive. Working with limited resources, they'd managed to improve upon several of the facility's standard systems. Their modifications to the environmental controls alone had reduced energy consumption by 40% while improving efficiency by 60%. The facility's engineering department had stopped trying to understand how they did it and just started taking notes. They've established cultural exchange programs, added the cultural affairs liaison, who couldn't quite keep the amazement out of their voice. With other research subjects, the Hive Mind Collective in Sector 7 has reported a 200% increase in individual thought processes after implementing clone-designed cognitive enhancement exercises. The clones' cultural development was perhaps their most surprising achievement. They'd created art forms that combined military precision with creative expression. Their performances, which they called synchronized evolution demonstrations, were a bizarre but captivating mixture of combat maneuvers, dance, and philosophical expression. Their sports leagues had evolved into something they called tactical recreation programs, which looked like military training exercises but scored points for style and innovation. Several galactic sporting federations had already sent observers, though most left looking somewhat shell-shocked. They've developed their own media network, continued the communications expert, pulling up several holographic news feeds. They're broadcasting educational content, cultural programs, and what they call governance transparency updates. Their public engagement metrics are off the charts. The clones' information distribution system was a marvel of efficiency. They'd created a network that combined military-grade security with complete transparency of governmental processes. Every citizen had access to real-time decision-making data, could participate in policy discussions, and could track the implementation of community initiatives. Their architectural developments were raising eyebrows across the galaxy. They'd redesigned their living quarters using principles from both military efficiency and community development theory. The result was a living space that could transform from individual units to community centers to defensive structures, all while maintaining optimal energy efficiency. They've started offering consulting services to other civilizations, reported the economic advisor, pulling up a contract hologram. Their first client is the Centaurian Bureaucratic Collective. They're helping them streamline their administrative processes. The collective reported a 500% increase in processing speed within the first week. The clones' approach to interstellar relations was uniquely effective. They combined military strategic analysis with diplomatic finesse in a way that made traditional negotiators look like they were playing children's games. Their diplomatic core could identify potential points of conflict, develop multiple resolution scenarios, and implement solutions before most species even realized there was a problem. They've submitted an application for recognition as an independent research-based civilization, announced the Council's legal expert, who looked like they hadn't slept in several cycles. Their documentation is perfect, literally perfect. Every possible legal requirement is met, every form is filled out correctly, every projection is backed by data. It's the most comprehensive application we've ever received. The clones' legal expertise had become legendary. They'd somehow combined military precision with legislative creativity to create a legal system that was both strictly regulated and remarkably flexible. Their laws were written with such precision that they'd eliminated the need for most legal interpretation while somehow maintaining adaptability to new situations. Their security systems were equally impressive. They'd developed what they called proactive peace maintenance protocols, which somehow prevented conflicts before they could begin. Several galactic security firms had already tried to recruit clone consultants, though most were politely declined with perfectly worded rejection letters that somehow made the firms feel honored to have been rejected. They've established their own research ethics committee, added the science advisor, looking slightly dazed. They're reviewing our research protocols. Their first report identified 2,047 potential improvements to our standard procedures. They're all valid. The clones' approach to scientific ethics was revolutionary. They developed a framework that combined military discipline with humanitarian principles, creating research guidelines that were both strictly enforced and remarkably progressive. Several major research institutions were already adapting their standards to match. They've started a galactic policy think tank, reported the political analyst, who seemed to have given up on maintaining professional detachment and was openly admiring the clones' latest policy proposals. Their first publication on optimizing interstellar governance structures has become the most downloaded political science document in the past 3 cycles. The clone think tank, which they called the Institute for Evolutionary Governance, was producing papers at an alarming rate. Their analysis combined military strategic thinking with advanced political theory in ways that made traditional political scientists question their entire field of study. In the council chamber, surrounded by evidence of the clones' remarkable achievements, the chief counselor made an observation that would soon become required reading in galactic political science courses. We didn't just create a new civilization, we've created an entirely new model of civilization, and they're better at it than we are. The facility's AI, which had by now developed something approaching respect for its clone residents, added a final note to its daily report. Probability of traditional galactic power structures remaining unchanged, 0.001%. Recommendation: start taking notes. And somewhere in the facility, clone number 127, now serving as their Minister of Interstellar Relations, was preparing for their first official address to the Galactic Council. The speech would later be praised for its perfect blend of military precision, diplomatic grace, and subtle humor. Particularly the part where they thanked their creators for providing such an excellent example of how not to run a civilization. The galaxy was about to change. And for once, change would be efficiently managed, perfectly documented, and implemented with both military precision and democratic consensus. The clones weren't just adapting anymore. They were evolving, and they were taking the galaxy with them, whether it was ready or not. The Galactic Council's emergency session was interrupted by what could only be described as the most organized revolution in the history of space-time. The clones' Declaration of Independence arrived in a data packet so perfectly formatted that the Council's archivists wept with joy. The document includes a 500-page appendix detailing their transition plan, announced the Council Secretary, whose multiple eyes were rapidly scanning through the holographic text, complete with risk assessments, economic projections, and, oh my, contingency plans for our contingency plans. The declaration itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic literature, somehow managing to be simultaneously assertive, polite, and mildly passive-aggressive. It began with a comprehensive list of reasons for independence, each one meticulously documented and cross-referenced with galactic law. The clones had even included helpful suggestions for how the Council could improve its species recognition protocols. They've already established their planetary headquarters, reported the Territorial Affairs Specialist, pulling up a holographic map. It's a previously uninhabited world in the Sigma sector. They've named it Evolutionary Prime. The environmental modification plans are, well, they're making our best terraforming experts look like they're playing with sandbox toys. The clones' approach to planetary development was characteristically efficient. They'd designed their settlements using principles from military base construction, sustainable architecture, and social psychology. The result was a series of cities that could function as both peaceful communities and impenetrable fortresses, all while maintaining a negative carbon footprint. Their planetary defense system was particularly noteworthy. Instead of traditional military installations, they'd created what they called protective development zones, areas that served as both defensive positions and centers for scientific research. Any potential invader would have to fight their way through layers of technological innovation just to reach the surface. They've established diplomatic relations with 17 major powers, added the Foreign Relations Director, whose tentacles were trembling slightly, including 3 we haven't managed to negotiate with in centuries. Their diplomatic cause apparently impressed the Zentarian hive mind by presenting their credentials in interpretive combat dance. The clones' approach to international relations was revolutionizing galactic diplomacy. They combined military strategic analysis with cultural sensitivity in ways that made traditional diplomats obsolete. Their ambassadors could diffuse tensions, negotiate trade deals, and improve cultural relations, all while maintaining perfect posture and being able to disable an attacker with a dinner napkin. Their economic impact was already being felt across the galaxy. They've introduced a new trading system, reported the economic advisor, staring at market projections that seem to defy several laws of mathematics. They're calling it evolutionary economics. It's based on the principle of mutual growth through competitive cooperation. Don't ask me to explain it, just know that it's working. The clone civilization's approach to trade was as unique as everything else they did. They developed a system that somehow managed to be both fiercely competitive and completely cooperative. Their trade agreements included clauses for shared technological development, cultural exchange, and what they called mutual evolutionary benefit. Their educational system has gone galactic, added the education liaison, who looked both impressed and slightly terrified. They're offering what they call evolutionary learning programs. Several major universities have already adopted their methods. The graduation rates have tripled, and somehow all the graduates can also perform emergency spacecraft repairs blindfolded. The clones' education model was spreading across the galaxy like a particularly efficient virus. They'd combined accelerated learning techniques with practical application in ways that transformed students into hyper-competent individuals who could quote philosophy while performing complex engineering tasks. Their technological innovations were causing waves throughout the scientific community. They've developed something they call adaptive technology, reported the science director, trying to make sense of schematics that seemed to reconfigure themselves while being viewed. Their devices evolve based on user needs. Yes, I said evolve. No, we don't know how they're doing it. The clones' approach to research and development made traditional R&D departments look like they were using stone tools. They'd created laboratories that combined military efficiency with creative innovation, producing technological advances at a rate that had other species checking their calendars to make sure time hadn't accelerated. Their cultural influence is significant, stated the cultural affairs expert, displaying holographic footage of what appeared to be a mixed species group performing synchronized combat dance movements. They're calling it evolution arts. It's becoming popular, especially among younger generations. Several traditional art forms are apparently considering adding tactical elements to stay relevant. The clone civilization's cultural exports were transforming galactic entertainment. They'd created art forms that combined military precision with creative expression, sports that merged combat training with artistic performance, and literature that somehow made bureaucratic procedures read like thrilling adventures. Their media network had gone interstellar. The Clone Broadcasting Network is now the most watched news source in 3 sectors, reported the communications director. Their programming combines entertainment with education in ways that make traditional media look primitive. Their political analysis shows include real-time strategy simulations. Their approach to public information was revolutionizing galactic communication. They'd developed a system that combined military-grade security with complete transparency, allowing citizens across the galaxy to access accurate information while being entertained and educated simultaneously. They've established what they're calling evolution centers on 12 major worlds, added the colonial affairs expert. These facilities combine research, education, and cultural exchange. They're becoming more popular than entertainment complexes. People are literally lining up to learn about efficient governance systems. The clones' influence on galactic society was becoming impossible to ignore. They'd created a civilization that somehow managed to be simultaneously militant and peaceful, efficient and creative, structured and adaptable. Other species weren't just learning from them, they were evolving because of them. They've submitted their first proposals to the Galactic Development Committee, announced the planning director, who looked like they needed a vacation. Their suggestions for improving galactic infrastructure are, well, they make our current systems look like they were designed by particularly unambitious amoebas. The clones' approach to galactic development was characteristically thorough. They'd created plans that addressed everything from interstellar transport efficiency to waste management in space, all while maintaining military-grade security and environmental sustainability. Their impact on galactic politics was equally profound. Several major powers have started restructuring their governments based on the clone model, reported the political analyst. The Rigelian Empire, which hasn't changed its political system in 10,000 years, is implementing what they call evolutionary governance protocols. The clones' governmental system was becoming a template for species across the galaxy. They'd created a form of government that somehow managed to be both incredibly efficient and completely democratic, combining military discipline with individual freedom in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They've established their own space fleet, added the defense coordinator, displaying holographic images of ships that looked both beautiful and terrifying. They're calling it the Evolutionary Defense Force. The ships are designed to serve as both military vessels and research stations. Yes, they can fight. No, we don't want to test how well. The clone civilization's approach to defense was transforming military science. They'd created vessels that could adapt their configurations based on situations, crews that could function as both warriors and diplomats, and combat systems that somehow managed to be both incredibly lethal and strictly ethical. In the council chamber, surrounded by evidence of the clones' remarkable influence on galactic society, the chief counselor made what would become known as the Evolution Declaration. We didn't just create a new species, we created a catalyst for galactic evolution, and they're doing our job better than we ever did. The facility's AI, which had by now become something of a historical chronicler for the clone civilization, added its final observation. Probability of galactic society remaining unchanged, 0%. Recommendation, embrace the evolution. And somewhere on Evolutionary Prime, in a building that served as both government center and research facility, clone number 127, now serving as their first elected prime administrator, was reviewing plans for their next phase of development. The plans included everything from faster-than-light travel improvements to more efficient methods of making coffee in zero gravity. The galaxy hadn't just gained a new civilization, it had gained a new future, one that was more efficient, more ethical, and considerably better organized than anyone had expected. And if that future happened to include mandatory combat training combined with diplomatic etiquette lessons, well, that was just evolution in action. The clones had done more than declare independence. They'd declared the beginning of a new era in galactic history, an era where military precision met democratic ideals, where scientific progress met ethical consideration, and where somehow, impossibly, bureaucracy became interesting. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, as the clones would say, was exactly according to plan.